3 security guards pounding on my door at 6 a.m., telling me to leave my own cabin. Oh no, Karen messed with the wrong property owner today. HOA tried to evict me from my lake cabin. Turns out I own the whole lot and their boat dock. Part 1. The knock, the cabin, and the start of war. I didn't come to Pinewood Lake for drama. I came here to breathe, to stand where I stood as a boy, to sit on Grandpa's porch, sip coffee in peace, and maybe, just maybe, feel human again after a brutal tax season. Instead, I got guns, a clipboard, and the kind of knock that feels more like a raid. Thud, thud, thud. It was 6 a.m. I hadn't even put socks on. 3 armed security guards were at my door, hands hovering near sidearms, grim faces locked in that self-important frown. "You Carwin Porter?" the tallest one asked, eyes scanning his clipboard like I was just another box to check. I nodded, still holding my coffee mug, still half asleep. "You have 48 hours to vacate this property," he said, and shoved an envelope against my chest like it might explode. I blinked. Vacate? This is my grandfather's cabin. He owned it for over 50 years. He didn't flinch. "You're in violation of Pinewood Lake community ordinances. This land is HOA property. Encroachment, boundary violations, fines apply. Take it up with Ms. Clark. HOA office opens at 9. And just like that, they turned, climbed into a spotless white SUV with Pinewood Lake Community Association painted on the side, and vanished down the gravel road. I stood frozen, bare feet on the cabin's wooden threshold, coffee cooling in my hand, and a thick envelope full of legal threats dangling from my fingertips. I wasn't dreaming. This wasn't a mistake. This was war. 3 months earlier, I'd inherited the cabin after my grandfather passed at 92. Growing up, I spent summers here, barefoot, sunburnt, fishing with Grandpa, roasting marshmallows by the fire. Those summers ended when I was 15, when my parents divorced and tradition dissolved into awkward joint holidays and silent car rides. But I never forgot this place. I hadn't been back in nearly 20 years. Didn't even take time off work when I inherited it. I'm a forensic accountant. Vacations don't exist during tax season. But this year, I cracked. I needed to breathe, not in an office tower, but somewhere real. So I came here, to Pinewood, to memories, to legacy. And now, they were trying to take it from me. The drive up had been almost healing. 3 hours north of the city, buildings gave way to soybean fields, which gave way to towering pines and mirror-flat lakes. With every mile, my shoulders loosened, and when I finally turned onto the gravel road, I felt something in my chest shift. There it was, the A-frame, Grandpa's cabin, still standing proud against the water's edge like it hadn't aged a day. I stepped out, and the air, that crisp mix of pine sap and old timber, punched me with nostalgia. Inside, exactly as I remembered. The walls lined with warm, knotty pine. That same saggy couch we used for card games on rainy afternoons. The fishing lures still lined up over the mantel, faded but proud. That first evening, I sat on the back deck with a beer in hand, watched the sunset blaze, orange and violet, across the lake, and whispered to no one. I'm home. I fell asleep that night making plans, replaced the worn deck planks, fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen, maybe even finished that dock Grandpa always dreamed of building. But at dawn, they came. 3 uniforms, 3 guns, 3 words that shattered the peace. You're trespassing. And just like that, this cabin, my inheritance, my history, my home, was now a battleground. Part 2. The Clipboard Queen and the Ghosts of Pinewood. The guards were gone. but their words kept echoing in my ears like gunshots bouncing off the pine trees. "You're trespassing. 48 hours. HOA Ordinance." I stood on the deck of my grandfather's cabin, a place that held more of my childhood than any school yearbook ever could, and I felt violated. I walked down to the dock, hoping the lake breeze would clear my head. But the calm water did little to cool the storm building inside me. The dock creaked beneath my bare feet. Weathered planks, sun-bleached and time-worn, just like Grandpa left them. His old rowboat was still there, too, covered with a ratty green tarp, one corner flapping in the breeze. I used to sit here for hours as a kid, legs dangling off the edge, casting lines with Grandpa as he told stories about the one that got away. I looked around and whispered, "How could anyone say this isn't ours?" That's when I heard a voice behind me, older, gravelly, familiar somehow. "You must be George's grandson." I turned to see an elderly man in a faded fishing vest, walking slowly from the next lot over. "Shanley Maddox," he said, extending a hand. "Your grandpa and I were fishing buddies for over 40 years. I shook his hand, grateful for a friendly face. He listened patiently as I explained what had happened that morning. The security guards, the eviction notice, the threats of fines. His expression darkened. "That'd be Doris Clark's doing," he muttered. "She's been running the HOA like a dictator ever since she took over 3 years ago." He sighed heavily, his eyes scanning the lake like it betrayed him. "She started a development company, real fancy name, and now she's trying to buy up every old cabin lot on this shoreline." I frowned. "For what?" Shanley lowered his voice. "For condos." My stomach twisted. "She offered your grandpa a buyout," he continued. "But he refused. Fought her with everything he had. Wouldn't give up this place. Said it was worth more than any check." His voice dropped even lower. "Between you and me, I think that fight is what finally wore him down." I spent the rest of that morning trying to make sense of the legalese in the envelope they gave me. It was thick, full of bold letters, threats of $25,000 fines, and language so vague it may as well have been written in code. Apparently, my cabin was encroaching on community property by 50 feet, and that made me a liability. They claimed I was a safety hazard, a threat to property values. As if this porch swing and leaky faucet were a ticking time bomb. I knew it was nonsense, but it was working. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. They were trying to evict me from my grandfather's home, like I was some squatter. And then, something odd. That afternoon, I was back by the dock, inspecting the boards for repairs, when I noticed fresh scratch marks on the wooden posts. Rope marks. Several of them. Boats had been tied here recently. Multiple boats. "Hey, Shanley," I called out. "Has someone been using this dock?" He didn't even look up from his garden. "Oh, yeah," he said with a snort. "Doris's people have been renting out prime dock spots to weekenders. Your dock's been listed on one of those vacation apps. $200 a pop. Yours is deep water, best fishing around." I stared at him in disbelief. "You're telling me they've been making money off my dock while I wasn't even here?" He shrugged. "Probably made a few thousand easy since George passed." I felt heat rise to my face. So this wasn't just about evicting me. This was about profiting off me, about taking what wasn't theirs and turning it into a cash cow while pretending I was the one in the wrong. That night, I sat at the old dining table, eviction papers in front of me, maps scattered across the wood like war plans. Something didn't add up. The survey map in the HOA's documents, it didn't match what I remembered. The lines, the landmarks, the property edge. None of it made sense. And then it happened. As I reached for another paper, a thin folder slipped off the bookshelf behind me and hit the floor with a soft thud. The label on the front was written in neat, slanted handwriting. Pinewood Lake, original survey. Keep safe. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside? A yellowed survey from 1963. Multiple property deeds. And a small leather journal. I ran my fingers over the pages. And I felt it. This was it. This was Grandpa's secret weapon. And I had just found it. Part 3. The Journal. The Lawyer. And the Truth Beneath the Trees. I barely slept. That folder sat on the table all night like it was glowing, pulsing with something bigger than paperwork. At sunrise, I opened it again, heart pounding like I was about to open a safe full of secrets. The original 1963 survey map was in pristine condition, creased but legible, drawn by hand with meticulous care. And at the bottom, in ink that hadn't faded one bit. Prepared by George Porter, registered land surveyor. My grandfather had drawn it himself. And according to his survey, the real one, not the HOA's copy-paste abomination, this cabin didn't encroach on community land. This land was the boundary. And the lakefront? It was ours. Not 10 feet. Not 20 feet. 70 feet of shoreline. Every single inch of it. I felt dizzy, like I'd uncovered treasure buried in plain sight. Then I opened the journal. The first few pages were notes, property boundaries, elevation readings, drainage slopes, the kind of dry stuff only a lifelong surveyor could love. But then, the entries changed. May 12th, HOA President Doris Clark visited today, offered to buy the lot, price insultingly low. When I declined, she hinted at new community regulations, implied non-compliance, I'm not selling, taking precautions. August 3rd, discovered camera installed on property line tree. No notification, no permission. Reported to county, no response. Logged December 17th. Received notice claiming dock violates new setback rule. Dock has existed in current form for 22 years. Photographed, documented. It went on like that, line after line. A slow, methodical war Grandpa had fought until his last breath. I swallowed hard. The man didn't just build this place, he defended it for years. I suddenly understood why the couch sagged like it had been sat in during long, bitter nights. Why the deck railing had new screws but old wood. He wasn't just maintaining the cabin, he was holding the line. I needed help. Someone who understood legal traps and had a spine. That's when Ira Finley showed up. She appeared that same morning, boots dusty, camera slung around her shoulder, walking the edge of her own lot just north of mine. "Can I help you?" I called out, still jittery from the night's discoveries. She looked up, startled, then offered a cautious smile. "You must be Carwin," she said. "I'm Ira, your neighbor. Shanley mentioned you were having HOA issues." I paused, eyes narrowing. "Are you with the HOA?" That made her laugh. Number God, no. I'm an environmental lawyer. I've been fighting Doris for 2 years. We sat on the deck. She sipped tea while flipping through Grandpa's journal and survey. Her eyebrows rose with every page. "These are gold," she said finally. "They prove your claim. And then some." She pointed to the map again. "See this cove here? That's where the new community dock is being built, right?" I nodded slowly. "Well, this survey says you own that cove. All of it." My jaw clenched. "That's why they want me gone, isn't it?" Era nodded grimly. "Your property has the deepest water access on the lake. Perfect for a marina. Doris's company is trying to build luxury condos across the water. But they need this cove." She paused. "And your grandfather, he blocked them, refused to sell. So," I finished her sentence. "They're trying to force me out." She didn't deny it. "Welcome to Pinewood," she said dryly, "where the HOA isn't just about trash bins and lawn heights. It's about millions in lakefront development." I looked out at the trees swaying in the breeze. This wasn't a neighborly disagreement. This was a land grab in disguise. And now, it was my fight. Part 4. The Queen appears, and the cameras start rolling. It didn't take long for the Queen of Pinewood to arrive. That afternoon, a gleaming white SUV pulled into my gravel driveway like it owned the place. Out stepped Doris Clark, HOA president, real estate developer, and self-declared ruler of all she could see. She wore a cream-colored suit too clean for lake country, heels that didn't even sink into the gravel, and a glare sharp enough to cut drywall. Flanking her were two clipboard-toting assistants, expressions blank, like interns auditioning for a cult. She didn't even greet me. She walked straight onto my deck like she had a deed in her pocket. Snap, snap, snap. Her phone camera clicked away. Photos of my boat, my porch rail, even the bird feeder. "Mr. Porter," she called with fake cheer. "We're conducting a community inspection." I stepped out slowly, arms crossed. "Your deck railing violates HOA safety codes," she continued, "and that boat hasn't been registered. Also," she pointed toward the trees, "we've installed new surveillance equipment for resident safety. Just so you're aware." I followed her finger and spotted it. A tiny black camera, mounted halfway up a pine tree, pointed directly at my bedroom window. My chest burned. I forced a polite smile. "Miss Clark, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I have original surveys." She cut me off with a wave. "Those outdated documents were superseded years ago," she said curtly. "The community has evolved. If you had attended any HOA meetings, you'd be up to speed." She handed me a packet, glossy, thick, reeking of toner and arrogance. "Current regulations. Also, you've been cited for unauthorized parking. $200 due in 30 days. I didn't flinch. "I'd like to see the documentation that supersedes my grandfather's deed," I said evenly. Her plastic smile faltered, just for a second. "That's available during business hours," she said, voice tightening, and then, almost like a threat, "I strongly suggest you come into compliance quickly, Mr. Porter. Fines accumulate daily." She turned on her heel and walked off, her assistants snapping more photos of my boat, my car, even my mailbox. One of them aimed at my bird feeder again. Seriously? The moment they left, I made 2 calls, one to the county assessor's office and one to ERA. The county confirmed something my gut had already whispered. My grandfather had filed for a full property reassessment just 6 months before his death. And the results? They'd come in 3 weeks before he passed. They were official. They were on record. And they confirmed every foot of shoreline, every inch of that cove, belonged to us. ERA arrived within the hour, flipping through the county paperwork like it was a treasure map. "Carwin, this isn't just good," she said, eyes gleaming. "This is a loaded cannon pointed right at the HOA." We laughed, for the first time all day. Then we heard it. Voices, footsteps, laughter. I looked through the window and saw 3 HOA board members walking through my garden like it was a public park, taking pictures, stepping on flowers, even tugging at my locked shed. They didn't knock. They didn't announce themselves. They were trespassing. ERA picked up her phone. calm as a surgeon. "I hope you've got cameras." I did. And from that moment on, I installed more. Every corner, every window, every tree line. If they wanted a fight, I'd show them how porters go to war. Part 5. The letter, the trap, and a clock that never ticked that night. After the last light in the trees flickered out, after I'd checked every camera feed twice, I sat at Grandpa's old table, the one with the scratches from card games and coffee cups, and I opened his journal again. Near the back, folded tightly between 2 pages, was a letter. The envelope was addressed in his handwriting. For Carwin, when the HOA comes knocking. I swallowed, hands trembling slightly as I slid it open. Carwin. I fought them as long as I could, but I'm tired. They want the land, and they won't stop. But the truth is in the surveys, the county records, the old maps. Don't let them take what's rightfully ours. You're smart. You see through numbers. Use that gift. I couldn't finish this, but maybe you can. Grandpa. My vision blurred. I pressed the letter to my chest and felt that quiet weight of love and legacy. He hadn't left me to fend for myself. He'd left me ammo. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. It was from the county records office. I tore it open like it was a golden ticket, and when I saw the header, I nearly laughed. Finalized property assessment, George Porter Estate. They had confirmed it, all of it. The property extended to the lake. 70 feet of shoreline. Riparian rights intact and unchallenged since 1963. Full documentation officially recorded 3 weeks before Grandpa's passing. I stared at the last sentence over and over. Lot 67 Lakeview Drive possesses shoreline ownership and all associated water access rights as defined by the original 1963 deed. In short, I didn't just own the land, I owned the lake access and the water. And that massive community dock Doris had built? It was sitting on my water rights, which meant I could make it vanish. That night, I sat on the deck, watching the moon ripple over the lake, and I remembered something else from the journal, a scribbled note near the very last page. Sometimes you need to see what happens when they think you're not looking. It didn't make sense at first, until I remembered the old wall clock Grandpa had hung in the hallway. It hadn't worked in years. The hands never moved, but something about it always felt off. I pulled it down from the wall and flipped it over, and there it was, a tiny lens, a pinhole tucked behind the wood grain. The clock was a hidden camera. Grandpa had been recording everything. I popped out the tiny memory card, slipped it into my laptop, and held my breath. Footage played, date stamped, time coded, clips of HOA inspectors walking into his cabin uninvited, photographing his mail, rifling through desk drawers. In one clip, Doris herself appeared, looking around like she belonged there. Sneering, smirking. "George is too old to fight us," she said to someone off-screen. "Once he's gone, we'll clear it out in a week." My hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just a power trip, it was theft. It was harassment. It was a campaign. And now, I had the evidence. Part 6. The dock. The meeting. And the day I flipped the script. The next morning, I stood at the edge of my dock, survey in one hand, county certified letter in the other, and stared out at the sprawling platform Doris had built over the water. It was shiny, expensive, crowded with boats that didn't belong to this neighborhood. It was also illegal, because every board, every post, every glossy plank of that dock sat squarely on my riparian rights, and I could remove it any time. But I wasn't going to just yank boards and start a war on the water. No, I was going to win this the smart way. That night was the monthly HOA meeting, held in a stone and glass community center built to impress, not serve. I walked in late, wearing my nicest button-down and holding a folder thicker than a law school textbook. Inside were 30 homeowners, seated in neat rows. And, at the front, like a smug little monarchy, sat Doris and her board. She spotted me and her smile froze. But I didn't stop walking. When the floor opened for new business, I stood. "I'd like to address the board," I said, "regarding the boundary dispute at 67 Lakeview Drive." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. A few heads turned my way. Doris didn't blink. "Property disputes are handled through official channels, Mr. Porter, not open forum." I nodded calmly. According to Bylaw 7.3, boundary issues that affect community resources, like docks you've been renting for profit, are valid for public discussion. She stiffened. I held up my documents. "This is a certified assessment from the county. It confirms that I own the shoreline, the dock site, and the full water access rights. Everything you've built out there, it's sitting on my property." The murmur started slow, then grew into a ripple across the room. I continued. "I've also documented multiple instances of trespassing, unauthorized surveillance, and illegal eviction efforts by the HOA. I paused, then added quietly, "I'm prepared to press charges, but I'd rather resolve this with transparency and accountability." Doris's face had gone from porcelain to brick red. "This meeting is adjourned," she snapped, slamming her folder shut. "We'll address Mr. Porter's claims appropriately." But as homeowners shuffled out, a few gave me nods, quiet thumbs up, even one whispered, "Finally." And that's when I knew. Her grip was cracking. But Doris wasn't done. The next morning I woke to find my utilities cut. Water, off. Electric, off. A notice taped to my door in bold red letters. "Emergency infrastructure repairs, 2 to 4 weeks. Ordered by HOA." I laughed out loud. She really thought this would break me. Instead, I drove to town and bought solar panels, a water filtration system, and a backup generator. If Doris wanted a fight of attrition, she picked the wrong opponent. Era helped me install the panels that same afternoon. She shook her head the whole time. "She did the exact same thing to the Hendersons last year," she muttered. "They gave up after a week." I looked at her, sun in her hair, tools in hand, and said, "Then we'll show her. Not everyone folds." That night I sat on my cabin porch, light from the solar panels glowing steady above me. I sipped lukewarm coffee, stared across the lake, and felt something rising inside me. Resolve, rage, and something Grandpa always called righteous trouble. I was done defending. Tomorrow, I'd go on the offensive. Part 7. Sprinklers, drones, and a community on the edge. The next morning, I got up early, not to sip coffee, not to watch the lake glow in sunrise gold. No, I got up to lay tripwires. Not the explosive kind, though part of me was tempted. These were smarter, quieter, legal. I planted motion-activated sprinklers along the tree line, installed solar lights to mark the real property boundaries, the ones from the county-certified map, and right in the middle of the so-called community garden that the HOA kept claiming was theirs. I drove in a big, bright orange stake with a laminated copy of Grandpa's deed taped to it. It was glorious. By noon, a familiar SUV rolled by slowly. Doris's assistant in the passenger seat snapping photos like they were casing a bank. I smiled, waved, and turned on the sprinklers. Inside, I reviewed the latest footage from my cameras, and what I saw made my stomach drop. Doris walking across my back lawn, flanked by two of her inspectors. And she wasn't inspecting. She was rifling through my shed, opening drawers, scanning shelves. One of the men held up a folder and she nodded sharply. "Take anything that looks official," she whispered. "He's bluffing. I want every scrap of paper before he brings in lawyers." I stared at the screen, heart thudding. She wasn't just violating property lines. She was stealing. And the kicker? She didn't know. The birdhouse behind her had a hidden lens. Thank you, Grandpa. That night, Era and I met at her cabin. We reviewed everything: footage, documents, old permits, HOA bylaws. And that's when she said it. "There's a pattern here. One we can prove. She's targeting older properties, harassing owners, then buying them at a loss through her development firm." I looked up. "You're saying it's coordinated fraud?" "I'm saying," she tapped her laptop, "it's criminal." She showed me side-by-side environmental filings. One submitted to the tourism board showing a massive marina development, and another submitted to environmental agencies claiming minimal shoreline impact. The documents contradicted each other, and both were signed by Doris Clark and her lawyer. "Classic bait and switch," Era muttered. "We send this to the state, and her whole operation stalls." I leaned back in my chair, breath catching. The woman tried to ruin me, steal what wasn't hers, and now I could ruin her back. The next day, I filed a formal HOA violation notice, but not demanding the dock be removed. Number Y offered a licensing agreement, a legal contract that would let them keep the dock on my water rights, in exchange for publicly acknowledging my property, a modest annual fee, and transparency moving forward. It was fair, it was reasonable, and it was a test. Would Doris accept or go down swinging? Her answer came fast. That evening, the HOA called an emergency board meeting. Era and I showed up early, front row, folders in hand. Doris launched into her usual song, loud voice, fast words, crocodile smile. "Mr. Porter is attempting to extort this community," she announced. "He's exploiting outdated legal language from 60 years ago. If we allow this, every lakefront owner will demand fees." She turned to the crowd. "Is that the future we want? Fines, licenses, chaos?" Murmurs spread. People looked uneasy, and that's when the door opened, and Jeffrey Taylor, the harbor master, walked in. He stood calmly, holding a folder, and said, "Mr. Porter's documents are legitimate. I've reviewed them. His claim is valid. The dock, as it stands, requires his permission." The room went silent. Doris's mouth opened, but no sound came. And then Jeffrey turned and walked out, murmuring, "No, Doris, you're out of order." And just like that, her castle started to crumble. Part 8. Lockouts, hidden cameras, and the last straw. The next day, everything snapped. I returned from town, groceries in hand, only to find my front door locked with a new padlock. My key didn't fit. I dropped the bags, heart pounding, and ran around the side, windows shut tight, curtains drawn. But the worst part? Voices. Inside. When I banged on the door, someone inside shouted, "Maintenance crew! HOA orders! Step back, sir!" I stared in disbelief as unfamiliar men moved around inside my home, my family's things, touching drawers, moving furniture, and just like that, they were stealing my life. I called the sheriff, furious, shaking, ready to scream. But when he finally showed up the next morning, a full 18 hours later, he just leaned against his cruiser and shrugged. "Looks like a civil dispute," he said lazily. HOA says you're in violation. Courts will have to sort it out. I showed him the county documents, the certified surveys, the video footage, the letter from my grandfather. He didn't care. Take it up with a judge, he mumbled, then climbed back into his car. I tried calling lawyers, 5 different firms. All of them said the same thing. Sorry. Conflict of interest. Translation? Doris had them all in her pocket. I sat in my truck that night, locked out of my cabin, watching strangers carry my family's memories out in boxes labeled Pinewood Development Corp. And for the first time in years, I cried. I called my mother, told her everything. And she, gently, softly whispered, "Maybe it's time to let go, Carwin. Your grandfather wouldn't want this to destroy you." But I wasn't destroyed. Not yet. Because just when I thought all was lost, help showed up. Era pulled up in her Jeep that night with a cooler full of food and a look in her eye like she'd punched bullies before. "You're staying with me tonight," she said. "No arguments." When I stepped into her cabin, I wasn't alone. Shanley was there, and 2 other neighbors I barely knew. One of them, an older woman with a cane, stepped forward and said, "She did the same thing to my brother last year, and we're not letting her get away with it again." We ate stew, we shared stories, and one by one, the horror show unfolded. A family forced out over excessive garden plants. An elderly widower whose driveway was blocked for weeks until he sold. A retired teacher fined repeatedly for decorative violations until she gave up. It was all the same. Harassment, intimidation, forced sales, and at the heart of it all, Doris. Before I left that night, Shanley handed me a small box wrapped in faded newspaper. "George left this with me," he said. "Told me to give it to you. If things ever got ugly." Inside was an old wooden wall clock, but when I opened the back, another note, in Grandpa's unmistakable writing, "Sometimes you need to see what happens when they think you're not looking." Inside the clock, a hidden micro camera, another one, perfectly wired, still functional. Era stared at it in awe. "He was building a case," she whispered, "even back then." I closed the box. Fists clenched. Grandpa fought as long as he could. Now it was my turn to finish what he started. Part 9. The Injunction, the Audit, and the House of Cards by Sunrise. I wasn't just angry. I was ready. Fueled by stew, coffee, and righteous rage, I filed an emergency injunction with the county court, citing illegal eviction, theft of property, and unlawful entry. Era worked the phones like a storm. Within 48 hours, we had a hearing scheduled, and whispers were already spreading across Pinewood. But I didn't stop there. While the court gears slowly turned, I turned to what I knew best: numbers. Shanley handed me stacks of old HOA reports and newsletters, dusty binders full of fees, budgets, vague improvement projects. And as a forensic accountant, I saw it instantly. Fraud. HOA dues had nearly tripled in 3 years. But the money, it wasn't going to roads or community repairs. Huge administrative costs with 0 receipts. Transfers to a community development fund that didn't fund a thing. And the biggest red flag? That same fund shared a banking address with Doris's private development company. She was funneling HOA dues, homeowner money into her own sinking empire. Era leaned over my shoulder, eyebrows raised. "She's embezzling," she whispered. I nodded grimly. "And she's desperate." We dug deeper. It turns out, Doris had been pre-selling luxury condo units based on promises of exclusive lake access, the same access that ran through my property. She needed that dock, that shoreline, because without it, her entire $2 million project would collapse. And she knew it. She wasn't just evicting me out of spite. She was trying to survive. While we waited for the court hearing, I got busy. Created a website documenting everything. Maps, documents, camera footage, HOA violations. Installed motion-activated sprinklers and signs reading private property. Do not enter. Placed Grandpa's clock camera in plain sight, aimed at the cabin, baiting them. And sure enough, the footage came in. Doris, returning at night with 2 workers, opening drawers, scanning folders, and, on camera, whispering, "Grab anything that looks legal. We strip this place clean before he gets back in." Gotcha. The evidence wasn't just strong. It was damning. Then came the hearing. We walked into the county courthouse armed to the teeth. Binders, video, sworn statements from neighbors. The judge looked skeptical at first, until Ira played the hidden camera footage of Doris rummaging through my home. Then, everything shifted. His gavel came down hard. Temporary restraining order against the HOA, immediate restoration of my property access, court-ordered return of all personal belongings. And, best of all, the sheriff himself had to escort me back home. When I pulled up to the cabin with a squad car behind me, the security guard stationed at my front door practically melted. But he stepped aside. I walked through the front door like a soldier returning from battle. And the next morning, I removed every single section of the HOA's dock from my waterline, loaded it onto a barge, and dropped it off at the public marina. The message was clear. You don't own this. And Pinewood heard me loud and clear. Part 10. The meltdown, the meeting, and the end of a queen word spread. Fast. Neighbors whispered at the gas station, nodded silently at the post office. And when I walked into the local diner that weekend, it was dead quiet. Until the old guy at the counter lifted his coffee mug and muttered, "Good job." The dock removal had gone viral on the Pinewood community message board. Photos of luxury boats awkwardly floating at the public marina, tied to trash barrels and broken pylons. People started calling it the Great Eviction. And Doris? Oh, Doris was fuming. She called an emergency HOA board meeting, hoping to rally support, silence me, and push through a legal defense fund that would fine every homeowner $3,000 to fight me in court. Yeah, really. I wasn't invited, but thanks to Daniel Atkins, the one board member with a conscience, I knew exactly when to walk in. It was 7:14 p.m. Doris had just finished her angry monologue about entitled lake house squatters threatening community harmony. And that's when I stepped through the door, carrying a thick folder in one hand. "Before you vote," I said calmly, "you might want to see what your president has been doing with your money." Gasps, murmurs. Doris turned pale. "This man has no right." But one board member cut her off. "We've heard Mr. Porter's claims for weeks. It's time we saw his evidence." I started the presentation, slide by slide. Financial records showing $700,000 in HOA dues diverted to Pinewood Development Corp. Emails between Doris and her attorney planning to force me out. 2 environmental reports, one falsified, one hidden. Footage from Grandpa's hidden clock camera of Doris saying, "I don't care what violations you make up, just get him out. The investors are breathing down my neck." Then, the final clip. Doris. "Who's going to charge us? My husband plays poker with the sheriff every week. You could have heard a pine needle drop." Her face went from furious to frozen. Then she snapped. "You ungrateful people! she shrieked, voice cracking. "I carried this community. Those decrepit cabins were dragging down property values. Once the condos go up, we'll triple our worth and get rid of all the riffraff." Silence. Everyone in the room heard what she'd just admitted. On record. Someone in the back was filming on their phone. Too late to backtrack. The vote was swift and brutal. No confidence. Immediate removal as president. Forensic audit of HOA finances initiated. And every eviction notice, including mine, revoked. Doris stormed out, face red, spitting threats about lawsuits and retribution. But it was over. The Queen of Pinewood had fallen, and this time, no clipboard could save her. Part 11. The Rebuild, the Fund, and the Legacy of a Lake. The next morning felt different. The air was lighter. No HOA trucks circled my driveway. No cameras pointed through my windows. No clipboard-wielding minions marched across my land. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that lets your shoulders drop and your soul breathe. But I wasn't done. First, I filed a civil suit against Doris and Pinewood Development Corporation for illegal eviction, theft, trespassing, and property damage. The audit had already begun. And what they uncovered? Worse than anyone imagined. Fake board votes, forged signatures, missing funds, maintenance fees pocketed instead of used. Doris had run the HOA like a personal piggy bank until she ran it straight into the ground. Her luxury condo project collapsed overnight. Investors fled, permits were revoked, and her company went rah. I watched from my dock as movers hauled out designer furniture from her lake house, and a for sale sign went up. She left town a week later, silently, just a ghost in a white SUV. Meanwhile, Pinewood Lake was healing. Daniel Atkins, now interim HOA president, invited me to join a new community reform committee. I declined the title, but offered something else. A proposal, the Pinewood Property Owners Protection Act, a binding set of HOA bylaws that prevented unilateral decisions, required public financial disclosures, guaranteed homeowners the right to address the board, and barred any HOA leader from having personal financial interests tied to community development. The vote passed unanimously. For the first time, maybe ever, Pinewood had a voice. I turned my attention back to the cabin, replaced broken windows, repainted vandalized walls, and restored Grandpa's dock, plank by plank. But I didn't do it alone. Neighbors showed up, with tools, paint, sandwiches, music. What started as a one-man project turned into a weekend work party. A dozen people laughing, working, rebuilding. The same folks who once avoided eye contact, now asking if I needed help with wiring or trim. One afternoon, a kid from 3 cabins down ran up and asked if he could fish off my dock. I smiled. Of course, kid. That's what it's for. Era and I, we grew closer. What started as strategy sessions on her porch turned into long talks, lake walks, late dinners. 6 months later, she moved her environmental law practice into a cozy office in town. And most nights, she was back at the cabin, this time to stay. Together, we founded the Pinewood Legal Defense Fund, an initiative seeded with my lawsuit settlement designed to help homeowners fight back against abusive HOAs across the county. Because what happened to me should never happen to anyone. 1 year after Doris fell, we hosted a celebration, a full lakeside barbecue, open invite. There were kids playing by the shore, old-timers swapping fishing stories, families laughing under string lights hung between pines, and somewhere in the crowd, I heard someone say, This feels like what Pinewood used to be." As the sun dipped below the trees, casting gold across the rippling lake, Daniel handed me a mic and asked me to say a few words. I stepped up, heart pounding, and said, "My grandfather didn't just leave me a cabin. He left me a responsibility to protect what matters." This lake, this community, it's worth fighting for, and together, we made it stronger. I held up a frame, a photo of Grandpa on the dock, grinning, rod in hand. This is what he stood for. And now, so do we. Part 12, the cabin, the clock. And the message I sent her life at Pinewood Lake didn't just return to normal, it got better. The community center, once Doris's fortress, now hosted potlucks and game nights. The dock? No longer a point of control, but a shared space, managed by Jeffrey, the harbor master, under fair use guidelines. Neighbors helped each other rebuild neglected lots. The HOA finally became what it was meant to be, not a weapon, but a resource. And me? I stayed. I sold my condo in the city, turned it into a rental, and made Grandpa's cabin my permanent home. I updated it, just enough. Solar power, a better water system. But I kept the original pine walls, the sagging couch, the lures above the mantel. Because this wasn't just a house, it was a legacy. And every time I saw kids jumping off the rebuilt dock or neighbors fishing off the edge, I knew he would have loved this. One evening I sat on the porch with Era and Shanley. We were drinking spiked cider, the kind that sneaks up on you, and laughing over the time I sprayed Doris's assistant with the motion sprinklers. Twice. "That poor clipboard," Era said, smirking. And that's when Shanley leaned over and handed me a small box. "What's this?" I asked. "Final delivery," he said, raising an eyebrow. "George left it with me. Said it was for after you'd won." I opened it slowly. Inside, a beautifully framed, gold-embossed copy of the original 1963 survey. And taped to the back, a sticky note in Grandpa's handwriting. "If she ever pushes too far, send her this." I smiled. The next morning, I mailed a package to an address in Nevada, where Doris was now managing a dying strip mall outside of Reno. No letter, no words, just a neatly framed survey. With one line highlighted, "Lot 67 possesses riparian rights to all adjacent waters." And underneath it, a simple handwritten tag, "Always read the fine print." Back at the lake, we celebrated the one-year anniversary of the HOA reform. Families gathered, music played. Kids swam until sundown. At dusk, I stood beside Era on the dock, hand in hand, and watched the water shimmer in gold and fire. "This place was almost gone," I whispered. She nodded. "But it's stronger now, because you fought." I looked down at the dock boards, the same ones Grandpa once stood on, and whispered back, "No, because we fought." Sometimes, standing your ground isn't just about protecting what's yours. It's about defending the memories, preserving the spirit, and giving a community something worth belonging to. Grandpa left me a cabin, but together we built something bigger. We built Pinewood Lake, back into a home.